Well, first, just a little bit of introduction to me. My role at Pega is the business line industry specialist, which means I work with the sales team, the product development team, and the marketing team on our strategy for solution development and for messaging. And although I'm in the product world today, most of my background, my 20+ years inside of the Beltway, has been with the system integrators on customer site, working with all of you to implement systems, new deployments, patching, weekends, holidays. I know the aches and pains and what you go through. So just to set the context a little bit, I want to thank my panel for joining me up here today for our panel on customer-centric, making technology more human. And with me today, I have Chris Koppenberger. I got that right, correct? Yep, Chris, all right, there he is. He's with the USDA Office of the CFO, and he specifically is responsible for the grants management line of business, system owner. So if you've all heard shared services in the federal area, right? And easy Fed grants, have you heard of that? All right, he's your person. So Chris, thank you for being here today. I also have Dennis Dauphin, who is the director of the Office of Debt Collection Management within the U.S. Department of Justice. And among many hats that Dennis wears, he oversees the consolidated debt collection system. And so for any of you that might owe money to the U.S. government, you might want to run because Dennis is in the house, okay? All right, and then finally, you met Anna Rigney Phillips a little earlier today with the Veterans Administration Financial Services Center, and her official title is Chief for Financial Customer Support, but a lot of people know her inside of the Beltway as a superstar of FSC. So thank you so much, Anna, for being here. And I wanted to start, actually, before we jumped in and had the panelists talk a little bit about their program and their customer base, I wanted to throw out, since now you're refilled on coffee, a couple of fun facts for you all to think about. So when you're listening to our panelists talk about their program stories and you're thinking back, you know, keep in mind Jeff and Ying's conversation before on the 3 E's and how we're humanizing technology and how we go about doing that. Also consider these couple of fun facts. So quiz, I'm putting you to work. By 2020, it's predicted what percentage of customers will manage their relationships with organizations, and this is across all industries, right, without ever interacting with a human. Is it? Nope, we've got to keep clipping through. So it's actually A, 65%, raise hands, B, 75%, C, 85%. No one's raising their hands for all three. Okay, we have a couple. 85%. So think about that. How do we make systems more human when we're taking the human out of the process, right? So just concepts to think about. And one of the polls that we asked this morning right out of the gate was how many people are using, like we would have never seen this stat coming 20 years ago, and think of how much we've changed in 20 short years. But today when we did the poll and we asked who's using Amazon Prime and who's ordered a car service through Uber in the last month, I think over 90% of everyone in the room raised their hand. I mean, really crazy models. And then you got to talk about the millennials that are now entering. Not only are they customers, right, that we're talking to every day, they're employees, which is a whole nother aspect of this humanizing technology that we have to talk about. Because we all know they're pretty much have an iPad or an iPhone in their hand when they come out of the womb. And I'm pretty sure for expecting mothers today that they can probably see an iPhone when they do their ultrasound and when they're at the doctor. And if Apple can figure out a way to do that, I'm pretty sure they're going to. So there's a lot of considerations here. Next stat that I just want to throw out, and this is to let you know that you're not alone. So what percentage, and keep clipping through, there should be 3 options here. what percentage of customer service centers say that their current customer service systems are going to meet future needs by 2020? Okay, it's supposed to be, oh, I'm the clicker. Maybe that's the issue. Maybe that's the issue, and it's still not clicking. Okay, so A, 50%, B, 65%. Anyone? C, 80%. 80%, right? And that's across all industries. But the good news is that we have fantastic technology today, and there's so much opportunity to transform. So with that, I'm going to ask each one of our panelists to talk a little bit about their program and give you some perspective about what their programs and their objectives, and then I want them to define their customer base. So with that, Chris, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So USDA has 17 grant-making agencies with a grant portfolio of about $100 to $125 billion annually. So it's fairly substantial. Historically, all of those agencies acted really independent of one another. And for that matter, of the 17 grant-making agencies, currently there's 273 grant programs. And we deal with individuals, foreign governments, public international organizations, states, counties, local governments, universities, and the list goes on, nonprofits, international non-governmental organizations. So if it exists as a legal entity, we do business with them. And that's not just domestically, but of course across the globe. So with that, grants has always been a hot topic for growth. In fact, grants has grown over the last 10, 15 years, has grown about 100% or so. About $600 and some billion annually are spent there. And when I first came to the government, my observation was, holy cow, nobody's paying any attention to how this money's being used. And that we certainly need to spend more time monitoring and evaluating those programs than kind of doing low value return on investment activities like finding out what the status is. So with the goal of delivering agricultural services to our partners, all those organizations and individuals that I've talked about, we decided we really needed to have a system that would get rid of a lot of the low value, ensure that we were enforcing compliance with the myriad rules out there, make sure, most importantly, that our customers were getting paid timely, and try to do it in a way that was architected so that all agencies would be able to utilize those same processes, those same functions, and be able to come into the system quickly and cost effectively. And so after about 2.5 years of production, this Friday we will have our 8th agency within USDA in our solution, and we're managing somewhere around $75 billion.
Congratulations.
So, thank you.
That's fantastic. Dennis, can you talk
Sure.
about your program a little bit?
So I am part of the Department of Justice, and my office runs the Consolidated Debt Collection System, and that is a system that's used by the 94 U.S. Attorney's Office, which are geographically dispersed throughout the United States, and approximately 7 or 8 litigating divisions. And essentially, anytime a debt is either referred to us or a case is open where there's a civil or a criminal debt, that information is entered into our system. And so it's a huge responsibility for us because we're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of both civil and criminal cases worth billions of dollars. And one of the challenges that we faced with our current system and why we're moving to PAGA is that our user experience needs to be significantly upgraded. Our user base is not only geographically dispersed, but it's also different skill sets. We have not only financial management analysts that use our database, we also have paralegals that do the core work. We also have attorneys. And an attorney that is new to the system, new to the Department of Justice, needs a user experience that is very intuitive, that doesn't take a lot of knowledge or experience, 5, 6, 7 years of knowing how the system works, all the little quirks, which button you really want to push, which button you don't want to push. And that's sort of where we're at today. We have a system that is, it's good, it does its job, but it's not really the most user-friendly environment that we can make for our customer base. And the other aspect that we're moving towards more and more in the debt collection world is that we have an abundance of data. And I think a lot of government IT systems probably have too much data. And so, but you have a lot of data, but then how do you access that data? And then how do you turn that data into something that you can actually use to help you generate more results? And so in addition to moving towards Pega, one of the things that's going to allow us to do is to digitize a lot of our information and put it readily at your fingertips, whereas now it's in a case file that's sitting up on a shelf. That if you want to go look at something when you're looking at our screen, you've got to walk down the hall, pull that case file. Some case files are thin, some are extremely thick, depending on how old the debt is and how big the debt is. To find one little nugget of information that tells you what your next step should be. And so for us, that's a challenge. That's a challenge we're looking forward to solving and putting a much more useful and available tool in the hands of our litigators and our paralegals.
So I'll ask the question to the audience. Are there any litigators in the House? Okay, so I'm safe to make the comment. So we can empathize with Dennis here, because not only does he have an unpopular topic, collecting debt, and no one wants that phone call that they owe money to the US government, he has a user base of attorneys and financial folks, very different ways of using the system, and he needs to find a way to accommodate and get them up to speed on the system. And we all know statistically from past modernization efforts, #1 reason for failed implementations, user acceptance, right? So he has lots of challenges that he's working through. Anna, I know that we talked to you a little bit earlier in the morning, and thank you for coming back on our panel, but just as a fresher, why don't you just go over your program real briefly and define your customer base again?
Sure. So again, I work for the Financial Services Center. Specifically, I manage our call center operations. Right now, the focus is on commercial invoice processing. We have layers of customers at FSC. So we have service level agreements with the large administrations that talk about like how we provide services and what those metrics will be. But then we have those layers of customers in terms of an external customer, our vendors and providers that are providing goods and services or care to the veterans. And then we have our internal customers, our VA facilities, who are trying to certify and process transactions and need our help to do that. So a couple of different teams. That's the focus right now. Of course, we're growing as an organization as we look to take more work from VA that doesn't make sense within our hospitals and other areas. And so that's going to change a little bit, and we'll expand and consolidate. I think there's about 13 different small help desks within FSC today. So those will all fall under my organization, and then as we need to build a tiered relationship. Back to kind of the commercial invoicing, which is the main focus for us. Again, $14 billion of invoices are processed annually. So really busy. The IPPS is live, it's going. We recently did an upgrade on that application. But we're constantly looking at the data to adjust the system and make changes to make it smarter, faster, more efficient. And the call center is integral to that process as well, because now that we've implemented CRM within our internal facing customer team, we're starting to get information about why the stations are calling and where can we make changes within IPPS to, again, make it more efficient and user-friendly for our customers. So really excited to actually have data in the call center now. We were talking earlier about how in the past I would elevate to leadership and say, I think we have a problem with this specific function, and I didn't get anywhere, right, because I didn't have anything to support it. But now I actually have cases and metrics to help drive changes and really I think a cost savings opportunity as well, as we stop focusing on what we think we need to do and focus on what do we really need to do based on the data.
So, Anna, just diving into the rest of the questions here, can you talk a little bit about, we've heard a lot about communication channels and the opportunities that are open to us to implement in our programs. Can you talk about what communication channels that you're using today and what your roadmap looks like and what checks and balances you're putting in place to make sure that they're being used effectively, managed effectively?
Sure. So obviously we have the phone calls. That's primarily on the external facing team. Most of the work comes in via phone call. We also have email, which is my least favorite channel because it's really difficult to track and manage. And we have a self-service portal for our external customers where they can go and run reports and get status of payments. For commercial invoice status for the providers, we don't have that status yet, although we're in talks to try and get that information. We are certainly looking to expand the use of self-service, and that's a big change. We have, like I said before, Disparate helped us supporting our internal VA customers, and so we're really looking at some of these data elements that we're getting on the metrics and the reports. What are those hot topics that customers are looking for? Like, what's the primary thing they're calling about? And are those things something that they need to touch somebody in customer service, or can they get it on their own? Can we build a knowledge base for them, or can we build automated processes for them so they don't have to talk to the call center? Because I don't want folks sitting on hold for 10 minutes or however long the wait times can get. So looking at those channels. The other thing I would say is we've talked a little about social. Big VA has social media, and we've talked about exposing that for our external facing customers, but we're not quite there yet. We have to be really careful about opening that up, so we're trying to be cautious around that. And then as far as getting feedback and on those channels, we have to go back and talk to our staff. And you know, the interesting thing that I've seen as we've implemented the technology is where some of the staff were a little nervous and scared about it. As you put more technology in front of them, they get excited and they want more. And suddenly there's all these requirements coming up. But they are realizing the value that they bring to our operations. So they can actually pinpoint issues to help us make process improvements. And so it's having that kind of feedback loop with our staff and also our customers to help drive those improvements and expose those other channels if they're needed for them.
So in talking about the communication channels, how do you handle in your call center? And for folks out there, do any of you work in a call center, or have you experienced being in a call center? I highly recommend. It was very eye-opening to me the first time that I did a tour of a call center. And whether it's a federal government call center or a state and local 311 center or a 911 center, it's absolutely fascinating. And let me tell you, you empathize from the employee's perspective, the job that they have to do, because typically, you know, people want it's instant gratification, everything today. People want their answer immediately. And a lot of these folks with these systems, you know, all these disparate systems, there are multiple screens up there toggling, right? We talked about the issue with the Social Security number being masked, and maybe they need it to plug that into an old system, and it's really quite challenging. At the same time, always having that customer is right attitude. Just very much, if you're in the business of customer service, and whether your call center is the 2 or 3 overworked program managers in your office, or you have a live call center, take a tour, and I think it's very eye-opening. But when you manage your channels, Anna, do you specialize in your call center? How do you manage that?
Right. So so the first thing that we did was kind of organizing around the customer base. And so it was really important for us to divide based on the external internal. So that was one of the things that we did. The other thing that we're starting to do now is get into skill-based routing, and not from the IVR perspective, because believe it or not, we don't have integration with our phone system yet, because we're looking to implement new phone system. But identifying based on the types of customer requests that are coming in, what are the skills that map to those, and making sure that we have those aligned so they get to the right person that can really answer it. And the great thing that that's done for us is to be able to build knowledge within the call center. So somebody doesn't have to come in and know everything from day one. That's impossible, and that's kind of the expectation that we had in the beginning. So people can grow into that knowledge, and the skill-based routing gets it to where it needs to go and kind of draws those lines between the staff. And anything else on that?
No, I think that's really, actually perfect. And with call centers too, attrition's a real real issue, and that doesn't matter what industry that you're in. People turn over, and part of it is the frustration of not getting to the knowledge that they need, and in fielding unfriendly calls day in and day out.
And I would also say that the other thing that we did that was a significant shift was all of these little services across FSC, they were doing everything soup to nuts. So it was production work, customer service, and research and analysis. And there are different skill sets that are needed to do those different functions. And so it was setting people up to fail. And we can't do that to our staff. It really is about identifying what's the skill set required to do something and kind of aligning the functions and the work where they need it to be, and putting that success model in place for them. So stripping out production work and saying, okay, production team, you're doing production, and the customer service, they can just focus on really helping the customer and let that production team do some of the back office type of activities.
Fantastic, thank you, Dennis. So, you touched a little bit already on digitizing the data and the initiative that you have around that for your program. Can you dive into that a little bit more and explain what you're doing?
Sure. So one of the things that we're doing with PAGA and we're also doing with analytics, as I mentioned before, is we're we have a lot of data, but the information is not at your fingertips. And so one of the things that greatly was startling to me, and I've only been in this position for 2 years, is when debt collection, obviously, it's a pretty standard industry, and the first thing you need is somebody's credit report. Well, how do you get that credit report? And so one of the things that astounded me was that people get them through paper. They get them on an email, maybe it's emailed, maybe it's faxed, and then it's just a piece of paper. And if you haven't looked at your own credit report or anybody else's credit report, they're about 6 or 7 pages long, depending on how healthy your credit is or any of the things that have gone on. And so that can take a lot of things to start going through and looking and seeing what are the pieces of information that you need. And obviously if you're doing debt collection, you want to know property, you want to know how much money they're making, what their liabilities are. And so for us, one of the big things that we're moving towards is digitizing that, putting that into where it just pops right up on the screen. And then once you have it digitized, you can set your system so that it's no longer, oh, I've been doing debt collection for 20 years, I know what to look for. The system can actually pull in, and the commercial systems do this amazingly well. It pulls in and actually can look at all your liabilities, it can look at all your payments. You know, you have 6 credit cards, your average payment is this. And it can pretty much, with a good degree of accuracy, tell you if a person has a $15,000 student loan debt, knowing everything else that we know in their credit report, this is probably the sweet spot as to what they can afford into a monthly payment. And right now, that's sort of done by hook or by crook, by somebody's own experience. You could get somebody into a payment plan that's, they're paying $250 when really they could be paying $500 because you just, didn't ask or didn't know. And so for me, that's part of the digitization of the data. And so for us, that's increased collections. That's faster case turnover, that's getting successful resolution of cases, and really increasing our efficiency and our output on a day-to-day basis. And for me, that's key because the less paper, the less things people have to just dive into and start doing research on to try and get something as simple as, what's this person's liabilities, what's their income and liabilities. That will make a huge difference in our litigators and our paralegals' ability to do their jobs correctly. And a lot of it right now is sort of hit or miss.
Shifting gears a little bit, Dennis, back to your user base, can you talk a little bit about the techniques that you're using to make sure that your user base, the litigators, the financial management folks, are engaged in the process, both from a design and a requirements perspective, but also as you're moving to user acceptance and rollout, Sure. How do you plan to support them?
Yeah, our biggest focus is Agile, is just getting our user base in early, getting them to be early adopters, getting them part of the process, because we have found that if you don't do that, it's very easy for our user community to basically throw up their hands and say, this product is awful and I refuse to use it, roll it back to what it was before. So for us, one of the first things we did, and my program manager, Rick Smith, was up on the panel before, was we went out to the field offices because we think we know how the 94 districts do debt collection, but in reality, everybody does things just a little bit differently. And so it's very important to go out into those offices for our designers to sit down with them and say, you get a case referred from Treasury. What's the first thing you do? What's the next thing you do? What's the next thing you do? Walk me through the life of this debt until you get it established, you get judgment, you start doing collections, you close it out. And we went to 2 or 3 different offices to sort of get in that broad overview of how they may be doing things differently, because that affects then how you're going to design the system for them. And then also for us, it's big on training during user acceptance testing, getting their input quickly, getting it addressed, getting them a product backed out so they can see the changes that have been made. And then ultimately, before we start doing releases, is getting the community trained up on it. Like I said, we have people that could be financial management specialists, it could be IT people that love new technology. But we also have lawyers that use our system, and sometimes attorneys are very, they like to do things a certain way.
We've never heard that before.
And it's very hard then to come in and say, this is the way you've been looking at this screen for the past 10 years. Now it's going to look like something totally different. Same process, same functionality, well, actually improved in functionality, but it's going to look totally different. And sometimes that's a little bit jarring for them. And so part of that for our goal is to get out to them early, to get them used to the system, to get them testing it out, to get their feedback, because ultimately, if our users aren't using it, then it makes no sense to spend the money and spend the time and energy to upgrade it if they're not going to be happy.
I think one of the things I'm most impressed about from a user support perspective is the way that they're supporting the testing process is actually putting people on the floor and going into the offices of the litigators. Because at the end of the day, part of the problem, when we all know this when we use new systems, we're busy. And so you don't want to take the 2 minutes that it takes, or 5 minutes, or whatever it might be, to figure out a new system and how to click something. So the fact that they're actually sending support folks into the offices to help them navigate the screens, I think is a fantastic idea. And then just moving to Chris. So let's talk about onboarding. You just talked about how you just onboarded your 8th agency. You're looking to expand your user base. It's a very diverse set of agencies that you support to date. What are you doing to onboard these customers and make it a success story?
Yeah, so the first part is all the agencies who've come into EasyFed Grant Solution have voluntarily come on board. And I think that's important to note, especially from a USDA perspective. I think historically OCFO has been more top-down approach versus ground up. So that's the first and foremost. The second part is really listening to the requirements, and we've really moved to doing use cases to identify what those particular needs are for the organization, and then really kind of bolstering that by identifying what the acceptance criteria are for those use cases. So as you can see from the very beginning, there's going to be a theme, is the customer's always there. As we go through designing it, we're doing CRPs so that the client can see where we are after basically a half build, to see where we are after about a 95% build. They're involved in the system test and the user acceptance testing, and then hopefully properly trained. Right now what we're doing on the training piece is ensuring that we're training the trainers so that they have more buy-in on the product itself. So the whole process is continuing to identify the appropriate stakeholders, get them involved, not just in one spot, but throughout the life cycle. We want it to be their product. And in fact, we've furthered that. We have built a governance structure that is coordinated by the OCFO's office, but it's actually the active members, the board members, the support members for committees are all from the agencies. We want them really to drive the course, the direction for the solution as we move forward. And we encourage them as they're doing this not to just think that my program is unique. So there is a little bit of educating our customers. It's about to say, we understand what's your legal requirement for having that, and now that you have that legal requirement, how can we figure out whether this is an enterprise need, or how can we create the architecture to support an enterprise? Because certainly, if one of you have a question in here, there's at least probably 15 that have that same question. That goes true with needs also.
Absolutely.
That makes it an architectural need.
So thinking in terms of customer-centric, and being that we all work in the government, and metrics around being customer-centric may not be the same perhaps as other industries, because we work with big issues. We work with, it's important for us to make sure that customers feel comfortable when they get off the phone or they receive a chat message or an email. In that regard, Chris, why don't you talk a little bit about how you're approaching metrics?
Yeah, so, well, really metrics is a challenge, and we've gone through the academic exercise of creating metrics. But right now, I think the most important metric is that our stakeholders, whether they're agencies or end user organizations such as applicants or recipients of financial assistance, are getting what they need out of the system. And most of that is driven by compliance needs for both the recipient side and I'll give you an example. University of Missouri, who was one of our initial pilot organizations, they've learned that for the last 50 years they've been doing budgeting incorrectly for grant agreements. And so now they've gone about, instead of kind of doing an allocation method to cost, they actually do real cost when they submit a reimbursable claim. So there's certainly an educational part, but but now they're satisfied because they know when their auditors come in, they're good, and on our side, we know when the auditors come in, we're good. And that's kind of the inline. So that's the metric: is everybody getting what they really need?
Fantastic. And Anna, do you want to make a comment on? I know metrics is something that you've worked a lot on and to improve. Can you make a comment on that from a Veterans Administration perspective?
Yeah, so I have the standard metrics that any call center would look at, but the challenge is we still need to balance those. You can't just rely on your metrics. You still need to have a good customer experience. And one thing that we have to keep in mind, and I remind the staff, is a lot of our vendors are small disabled veteran-owned businesses. So that's our opportunity to really step up and provide good customer service for them. So the metrics are important. We use those absolutely, but I really look at the feedback. What are the customers saying about us? And when I see feedback that says this is the best experience I've ever had working with a federal agency, that tells me that we're doing a good job.
Absolutely. And also to the concept too of around employees and making sure that a lot of folks will make the comment of, you can't do exceptional customer experience until you've done exceptional employee experience, and that's, I think, something to keep in mind as we go forward. Final thoughts for the panel on best practices and techniques?
Yeah, so
I know Chris has a 1 o'clock breakout session.
Yeah, and for that matter, I'm available 24/7. So
literally.
So that being said, one of the things that I really that I really enjoy about the direction we're going is using PEGA for our external portal. This customer self-service is paramount. When we have control of the data, when we have control of the business rules, we now empower our end users to get the information that they need when they need it. And so, if I were to say, words of advice is put a lot of focus on that customer service aspect of self-service.
Absolutely. Dennis, final thought?
For us, it's really the digitization. We've rolled out analytics approximately a year ago, and have seen some good things with that. And so for us, the more data points we can get in, getting the users to enter or getting from external sources, the better we'll be able to make decisions and allow our users to make better decisions. And for us, it all goes back to the collectability of debts. And so whatever we can do to provide them with information that allows them to make better decisions, that's of the utmost importance to my office.
Consumable data.
Yes.
Anna, last thoughts?
Yeah, I think it just all goes back to, like, what is it you're trying to accomplish? and making sure the customer is part of that conversation, and that constant feedback loop of reevaluating and making those incremental changes, but realizing that there are going to be more changes that you need to do and be prepared for those. You're never going to be, I don't think you're ever going to be finished. You just need to constantly be ready for what's next.
Absolutely, you are never finished. The continuous feedback loop that we've been talking about all morning long. And with that, I know we're out of time and then some, and I just want to thank the panelists again for their participation.